Deputy Special Coordinator Ramis Al-Akbarov for his briefing, as well as Mr. Itai Epstein and Ms. Mariam Barghoutis for their remarks. Madam President, Greece was an early supporter of the Comprehensive Plan for Gaza, subsequently enshrined in Security Council Resolution 2803. The first phase of the plan marked a welcome step forward with early positive results. What is needed now is collective determination to translate progress into lasting impact. As ASG Tom Fletcher reminded us only days ago, the humanitarian reality on the ground remains catastrophic. We note, alongside Mr. Al-Akbar, the visit of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch and Latin Patriarch to the Strip, a small ray of hope amidst an unimaginable, difficult reality. While some progress has been achieved, the gap between needs and delivery remains wide and deeply concerning. Aid entering Gaza, including food of high nutritional value, is insufficient. Restrictions on critical dual-use equipment continue to impede relief efforts. Housing, medical evacuations, and healthcare services have yet to reach the levels required to address the immense needs of the civilian population. We call for the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid at scale, as well as for the opening of additional crossings across the Strip. Hamas and all armed groups must urgently and fully disarm, and we support Mr. Mladenov's sustained efforts towards this goal. At the same time, it is critical to implement early recovery projects in the entire Gaza Strip. Greece is ready to take part in discussions regarding the Horizon Fund so as to ensure a coordinated, transparent, and impactful recovery effort, in close coordination with the Palestinian Authority. We look forward to the Palestine Donor Group meeting in Brussels in a few weeks. We anticipate the NCAC's timely statement, as well as the deployment of the vetted Palestinian police forces and of the International Stabilization Force in Gaza. Despite operating in extraordinary dangerous conditions, humanitarian workers continue to deliver life-saving assistance. Their work deserves the fullest protection and unwavering support in accordance with the international humanitarian law. They must never be targeted, and accountability must be ensured in all circumstances. Madam President, as our Foreign Minister has stressed, Gaza and the West Bank form a single, indivisible territorial unit of a future Palestine state. We categorically oppose any plans to expand control over or annex parts of the West Bank. The evacuation orders in Al-Ahmar, the Land Registry and Settlement of Rights Initiative, the Antiquities Bill, construction plans in the E1 area, as well as demolitions and evictions in East Jerusalem, particularly in Silwan, are all indicative of an explicit vision of annexation. Equally, the protection of historical, archaeological, or religious heritage cannot become a pretext for large-scale land appropriation. We call for an immediate reversal of these trends. They run counter to international law, contrary to Resolution 2334, and steadily erode the foundations upon which a negotiated settlement toward the two-state solution must be built. Of equal concern is the sharp and unprecedented rise in settler violence targeting Palestinians, including Christian communities. Responding to the severity of such violence, the EU recently sanctioned extremists responsible for human rights abuses in the West Bank. While we take note of Israel's recent statements aimed at curbing settler violence, words must be matched with accountability, consistent investigations, and follow-up on the implementation of those decisions. Furthermore, We reiterate our call for unhindered access, the preservation of and respect of the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem, an issue of profound importance for interfaith coexistence. Madam President, the stabilization of the West Bank also requires the release of withheld Palestinian tax revenues. This is a prerequisite for reform, institutional resilience, and the preservation of the Palestinian Authority's fiscal capacity. We acknowledge and encourage the Palestinian Authority's ongoing reform efforts under very difficult circumstances, including the recent announcement of presidential elections in 2027 and amendments concerning parliamentary elections in the occupied Palestinian territories. An empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority will be a credible partner for peace. In closing, as we are approaching the first commemoration of the New York Declaration, the moment calls for renewed political courage and a reinvigorated diplomatic effort. We must restore a credible political horizon for the Palestinian people and advance a meaningful political process leading to a two-state solution in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barrow, Mr. Epstein, and Ms. Barghouti for their briefings. For years, the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, has been steadily deteriorating. The developments on the ground are not new, but the speed with which conditions are worsening has been accelerated. The developments have been documented repeatedly before this Council, including through the SG's quarterly reports on the implementation of Resolution 2334. The Council also had the opportunity to discuss these developments during the ARIA meeting held on the West Bank last month. Allow me to highlight a few of the most concerning developments. We are currently witnessing all-time high levels of settler violence against Palestinians. The stories we hear from the ground are brutal, as we have also heard from our briefers today. And civilians are being displaced from their communities as a consequence. Reports of Israeli authorities failing to prevent or hold perpetrators to account are deeply alarming. And recently, a 7-month-old Palestinian infant was killed in Hebron by Israeli defense forces. This incident is not only deeply tragic, but also a clear reminder of the devastating human costs that the civilians in the West Bank are paying. At the same time, settlement expansion is advancing at an alarming pace. Particularly concerning is the advancement of plans to establish settlements in the E1 area east of Jerusalem, where evacuation orders for the Bedouin community of Khan al-Ahmar have now been issued. If implemented, the E1 plan would cut the West Bank in two and compromise the territorial contiguity of a future Palestinian state, as well as hamper the prospects of a two-state solution. Denmark is equally concerned by the reports of expected establishment of the first permanent Israeli military presence in Area A, an area that under the Oslo Accords fall under Palestinian civil and security control. We are also deeply concerned by demolition and eviction orders in East Jerusalem, including the Silwan neighborhood, that continue to threaten Palestinian communities and alter the demographic character of the city. Meanwhile, the Palestinian authorities faces a severe financial crisis, not least due to the withholding of Palestinian tax revenues that Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. The consequences are not least being felt in the Palestinian health sector that is struggling to provide the basic assistance due to lack of resources. An effective and reformed Palestinian Authority remains essential for stability, governance, and the prospect for peace. Israel's restrictions on international NGOs operating in the occupied Palestinian territory and the unlawful demolition of UNRWA's headquarters further undermines stability and access to basic services for Palestinians. Taken together, these developments are not isolated incidents. They amount to a systematic consolidation of Israeli control across the occupied West Bank. They change realities on the ground, alter the map, and heighten the risk of annexation. This trajectory must be reversed. All settlement expansions must be halted immediately, and any attempt at de facto annexation prevented. We reiterate that Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law. Accountability for settler violence must be ensured, and we call on Israeli authorities to hold perpetrators to account. With strong Danish support, the European Union has introduced sanctions against extremist Israeli settlers and organizations responsible for serious and systematic human rights abuses against Palestinians. Security Council Resolution 2334 must be fully implemented. Palestinian tax revenues must be transferred without delay, and the Palestinian Authority must continue its reform efforts. In this regard, Denmark welcomes the announcement to hold presidential elections. Madam President, Denmark's position is clear. Israel's legitimate security concerns must be ensured, but crushing all possibilities for a Palestinian state through illegal settlements, settler violence, and financial suffocation is not an acceptable way forward. Lasting security cannot be separated from the two-state solution as chartered in the New York Declaration. It remains the only viable option for long-term peace and security. I thank you.
I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarov, Mr. Epstein, and Ms. Barghouti for their powerful briefings today. President, the United Kingdom is clear that a two-state solution remains the best way to bring lasting peace to the region and end the cycle of violence that has scarred generations of Palestinians and Israelis. As we've said numerous times in this Council, the implementation of President Trump's comprehensive peace plan, endorsed by Resolution 2803, is an important step forward towards ending that violence. Both sides must meet their commitments, with Israel removing restrictions on humanitarian aid, and Hamas decommissioning its weapons. Today, we focus on the West Bank, where Israel's policies are eroding the prospects for peaceful coexistence, and I will highlight three areas. First, settlement expansion continues in violation of Resolution 2334. Including the E1 project that aims to cut the West Bank in half and separate East Jerusalem. This is accompanied by demolitions, evictions, and the displacement of Palestinian communities. In early June, we saw the approval of over 2,000 settlement housing units across the West Bank, bringing the total approved this year to over 6,000. On June 24, Israel declared another 465 dunams of private Palestinian land as state land to make way for a settlement outpost. My Prime Minister has been clear that we categorically oppose expansion of settlements which are a violation of international law. We join this Council in rejecting any attempt at annexation. Second, as we've heard today from the briefers, violence and lawlessness on the ground remain alarming. According to the UN, there have been an average of 6 attacks every day against Palestinians in the West Bank since the start of 2026. The Secretary-General's recent report highlighted the staggering rise in attacks by settlers on Palestinian children, reportedly often supported by Israeli security forces. On 17 June, extremist settlers launched arson attacks on 2 mosques. These are not isolated incidents, but coordinated attacks on civilians, livelihoods, and religious sites facilitated by a culture of impunity. The government of Israel must uphold its obligations under international law and take urgent steps to halt this violence and hold those responsible accountable. The UK, alongside partners, has imposed sanctions on individuals and entities that finance and enable settler violence. And as my Foreign Secretary has made clear, we stand ready to take further action if the government of Israel does not take urgent steps to address the situation on the ground. Third, economic conditions in the West Bank are deteriorating sharply. Israel has withheld over $5 billion of Palestinian revenues, placing severe strain on the Palestinian Authority and its ability to sustain essential services, particularly healthcare and medical supplies. The government of Israel also continues to attack and undermine Palestinian financial institutions, which risks undermining economic stability more broadly, with consequences for livelihoods and regional stability. So, President, to return to where I started, this Council has given its support to the Comprehensive Peace Plan for Gaza. We cannot allow progress towards peace to be undermined by this deeply concerning trajectory in the West Bank. We must redouble efforts to stabilise the West Bank and inject renewed momentum into implementation of Resolution 2803 in Gaza. Both Israel and Hamas must meet their commitments. These are essential steps towards a just and lasting peace in which Israelis and Palestinians can live in security and dignity. I thank you.
I wish to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Rami Zalakbarov, and the representative of civil society, Dr. Itai Epstein, and Ms. Mariam Baghouti for their briefings. All were clear, precise, and very enlightening indeed. A few days ago, the Council met to consider the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and that was an opportunity for my delegation to recall inter alia our demand for a ceasefire, the disarmament of Hamas that should have no place in the government of Gaza, and we called upon Israel to comply with its own obligations pursuant to 2803. But today we meet to examine the implementation of Resolution 2334, adopted 10 years ago. This Resolution 2334 is clear. The creation by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal basis. It constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and a major obstacle to the two-state solution. Israel must immediately and completely cease all settlement activity. However, 10 years after its adoption, the trends that resolution was intended to stamp out have continued and even increased at an unprecedented pace. Israel's agenda is one of de facto annexation of occupied Palestinian territory and the forcible displacement of the people there. We staunchly oppose those actions. Madam President, 4 trends are of concern. The first, the acceleration of settlement activity and the advancement of Project E1. Its implementation would cut the West Bank in two and would deal an irremediable blow to the territorial contiguity of the Palestinian state and its integrity. Businesses must be aware of the legal, economic and reputational risks posed by participating in the construction of those projects, including the risk of being found in breach of international law. Second, the intensification of settler violence in a climate of impunity. These attacks aim to displace Palestinians, destroy their property, and expedite settlement activity. Israel, as occupying power, has the obligation to protect the Palestinian civilian population and to bring perpetrators to justice. Third, incitement towards these acts by the rhetoric and conduct of Israeli leaders. These include Minister Smotrich, who promotes the annexation of the West Bank, as well as the expansion of settlements, the recolonization of Gaza, and the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. This conduct is irresponsible and incompatible with the prospects of a lasting peace. Fourth and finally, Israel's deliberate weakening of the Palestinian Authority. The retention of $5 billion in tax revenue is rendering these institutions fragile. On the contrary, these are resolutions that should be strengthened and legitimized. A viable, reformed Palestinian Authority able to fully discharge its responsibilities remains essential for any credible political prospect. Madam President, Resolution 2334 calls for measures to be taken to reverse negative trends on the ground and to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. France is taking tangible steps to do just that. Alongside its European partners, France has adopted new sanctions against those responsible for violent settlement activity. France is ready to consider all new proposals if this violence continues. We have mobilized within the European Union to strengthen the differentiation policy and bolster the restrictions applicable to products coming from settlements in accordance with Resolution 2334 and the advisory opinion of the ICJ of July 2024. Nationally, we have prohibited Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and several violent settlers from accessing French territory. We are ready to take new measures if necessary. Madam President, finally, the situation in the West Bank cannot be decoupled from that in Gaza. Both are integral parts of Palestine. The dynamic whereby we're seeing annexation and the blockade of humanitarian aid compromises the progress fostered by the ceasefire agreement, the peace plan, Resolution 2803, and the New York Declaration. These dynamics fuel humanitarian catastrophes, regional instability, and threaten Israel's very security. We call for the full implementation of Resolution 2803. We also call, in so doing, for the disarmament of Hamas and Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. The developments on the ground must not prompt the Council to abandon the political objective. On the contrary, these developments make it more urgent for us to collectively rally behind that objective to preserve a two-state solution and guarantee both the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and Israel's security in accordance with the New York Declaration. France will continue to work to that end. Thank you. I thank the representative of France for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Rami Zalakbarov for his briefing and the CSO representatives Zita Epstein and Mariam Barghoutis for their informative contributions. The Secretary General's quarterly report on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334 vividly depicts a bleak picture. The human rights, humanitarian and security situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continues to severely deteriorate. Israel's accelerating settlement expansion, including in the E1 area, coupled with entrenchment of its civil authority administrative control, deliberately fragments the West Bank and undermines the viability of the two-state solution. Increasingly, Palestinian families are forcefully and lawfully evicted from their homes, properties being demolished to make way for new settlements, which are illegal under international law, and for settlement outposts, which are also illegal under Israeli law. The annexation narrative, as well as the glorification of violence expressed by some leaders and government officials, are unacceptable. They additionally create breeding ground for extremism and greater polarization. At today's briefing, we heard once again the devastating toll of Palestinian civilians. These are not just numbers, and every life lost, whether Palestinian or Israeli, represents a human tragedy, leaving behind families and communities burdened by immense suffering, grief, and loss. Across the West Bank, expanded checkpoints and roadblocks continue to make it increasingly difficult for the Palestinians to access their workplaces and basic services, including schools and hospitals. And it is unacceptable that humanitarian aid workers and life-saving services, on multiple occasions, have been hindered from reaching those in need. And we have witnessed deeply alarming access restrictions to the holy sites in Jerusalem during Ramadan, Passover, and Easter, the expropriation of land containing places of worship, and the recent arson attacks targeting mosques north of Ramallah. Israel has to respect historic status quo arrangements governing the holy sites in Jerusalem. And protection of safety and of all religious communities must be ensured. We strongly condemn violent settlers' attacks and forcible displacement and annexation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and we call on Israel to ensure accountability for the committed assaults and killings, stop the settlement policy, fully respect all of its legal obligations and prior commitments, and abide by international law and Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334. Madam President, a just and lasting peace requires that Gaza and West Bank be treated as one unified entity, governed in the future by a single, legitimate and reformed Palestinian Authority. The measures applied to prolong Palestinian Authority's fiscal crisis and destabilize the Palestinian economy are deeply concerning. And we call on Israel to ensure that the Palestinian banking sector can operate unobstructed and to release withheld tax revenues for the Palestinian Authority to be able to meet its budgetary obligations, pay public sector salaries and provide essential services. At the same time, the Palestinian Authority must take responsibility for fulfilling its commitments it has undertaken and continue comprehensive institutional and societal reform agenda, addressing radicalization while ensuring safe and dignified living conditions for Palestinians. We commend the Board of Peace and the mediators for their efforts in advancing the implementation of the Comprehensive Peace Plan put forward by President Trump and endorsed by the Security Council in the Resolution 2803. All parties must abide by the commitments they have made. In order to end the harm to the people of Gaza and any further security threats to Israel, Hamas and other non-state armed groups must accept the roadmap for monitored, verified disarmament and relinquish power. There can be no sustainable peace or stability while armed groups continue to operate outside legitimate governance structures and pursue violence as a political tool. The Gaza ceasefire must be fully respected and the so-called yellow line demarcation must be pulled back to where it was upon reaching the ceasefire agreement. And deployment of the ISF and Palestinian police and the early recovery of Gaza through the work of NCAG are much awaited. Unimpeded humanitarian access at scale must be ensured to the civilian population in Gaza urgently and unconditionally in accordance with international humanitarian law. And finally, Madam President, a political solution encompassing Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is the only way to sustain peace based on the two-state solution as defined by the Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration. Addressing the security and the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians requires renewed momentum in the implementation of the comprehensive plan and genuine engagement by all parties. And Latvia reaffirms its commitment to the shared objective. I thank you.